Hello, we are back again with another module on public speaking. This is a part of the course which is entitled Introduction to Functional English. Let us see how or what is all about public speaking. We have come across many instances where we talk to people. The whole process of communication is based on use of language, use of body language, as we had seen in our earlier module on soft skill. If you trace back the history of public speaking, one can have historical instances of Greek and Roman public speakers. We know about the famous Socrates. We know about, Indian traditional practices where public speaking was an important part. Therefore, the presence of public speaking is something which can be said to be an ancient, part of our social and personal lives. Now, speaking skills are very significant, components in our day-to-day interactions, in every form of interaction, be it personal, be it professional. So it is very important that we know how to make our communication fruitful, and in any interpersonal communication, which might include, the family communication. You are communicating in the family, you are communicating within a group of friends, among friends or acquaintances, or you are in a public space, in a public place where you need to talk, all of these, or in a professional gathering, you just communicate, and all of this can be considered to be public speaking. So when we look at the different situations where we have to, engage in the act of speaking, and that is also public, let us consider some important, or say some very familiar contexts or situations. Examine what happens to an individual, when that individual speaks to a large gathering. For example, such instances can be found when a teacher is, taking a class, or a marketing executive is, speaking to the prospective buyers, or the head of an organization is speaking to his or her employees, or an individual to a group of friends and acquaintances. There are also other instances or other examples where you find the individual, attending an interview. The individual is, responding to the questions or to the, sort of queries put forth by the panelists who are, interviewing the candidate, or you are speaking to a colleague, or you are having one-to-one chat with your friend, or you are speaking to your family members, having a talk at the dinner table or in the breakfast table, or even when you are in the shop or a bookshop, for example, browsing through the shelves, and you are talking to the person who is there to help you buying a book. In all these different situations, these dissimilar situations, you find that the individual is either addressing a single person, or the individual is talking to a group of friends, or to somebody who is an acquaintance, in a formal or an informal space, in a formal or an informal manner, and the context can be either formal or informal. In all of these dissimilar, diverse contexts, situations, what the individual indulges in while communicating can be understood as public speaking. So, whether one is speaking in an informal group, or to an individual, or from a formal position like the teacher taking a class, to an individual or a group, it becomes clear that our speaking is determined by the position we assume while speaking and to whom we speak. So therefore, it is important to understand that whenever we are communicating, the whole basis of our communication, the essence of our communication is affected, determined, influenced by the position we assume. So when the teacher is talking to the students, it would be very, very formal, the classroom context. Of course, there would be references to certain, other instances which you can relate to the class, but nevertheless, often and generally, ideally speaking, the teacher should or ought to remain within the confines of the syllabus and the context. Okay, so it is very important to understand that even if we are, using different context or are placed in different context, proper public speaking to take place, one has to have efficiency with soft skills. So now, having understood the different and the diverse contexts and the aspects of what what constitutes public speaking and how many directions it can actually spread into, let us try to understand public speaking through a definition. Okay, so public speaking, sometimes termed oratory or oration because it is verbal, you're orally talking, is the process or act of performing a presentation. You see, remember there are certain elements here. We will get into these elements in the definition. So public speaking is the process or act of performing a presentation focused around an individual directly speaking to a live audience in a structured, deliberate manner in order to inform, influence, or entertain them. So if you look at the definition, if you try to find out certain important essential traits in the definition, you would realize that it is first of all oral. So you are verbally communicating. It is also performing a presentation. It has to be performed. You cannot be, just like a statue, stand there and monotonously go on uttering all your words with the aim to finish it just like that. Performance has to be sober, subtle. It has to be very, very, pleasant. So that your presentation, the overall effect of the presentation is achieved optimally. Okay, and it is involved, it is focused around an individual who is directly speaking to a live audience, like somebody standing on the stage and giving a lecture in a structured. So when I am talking, for example, I am delivering this speech, how does a teacher talk to the students in the class? It is important that you have proper, like you write an essay. You do not begin with the conclusion. You do not suddenly begin with the body. When you write an essay, what do? You begin with the introduction. Then you talk about the essential subject or the topic, and then you get into the conclusion. So you have a structured speech in a deliberate manner. So that structure has to have a certain direction. So public speaking is an act, is an oral, performance which is structured, deliberate. Why? Because it has the intention to inform, influence, or entertain the listeners. So public speaking then is commonly understood as the formal face-to-face talking of a single person to a group of listeners. So in any public speaking incident or any public speaking event, you have a single person who is talking to a group of listeners. Okay, then it is also like closely allied to presenting. It's like a presentation. We all know what presentation is nowadays, although the latter is more often associated with commercial activity. So it can be, though we say that public speaking is more akin to or more allied to presentation, the teacher who is inside the classroom would make a presentation, but very often, in all likelihood, it is understood that public speaking, if you consider it more as a presentation, it would perhaps commonly refer to commercial activity. So let us now get into the components of public speaking. So public speaking, if we remember the definition, now if we look at the components, we can have both verbal and non-verbal components. So just the important elements or components that build up public speaking. We have a sender. So who's the sender? One who is sending the message. In this case, who is speaking. And then message. You have to have. You just do not go out and speak just like that. Even when you are in your, in your friend circle, you are doing the talking, you definitely have a certain message that you wish to convey. For instance, you might, rush into the group of friends who are there sitting over a cup of coffee, and you come from your class and you say that today was a very dull class. So that is the message. If you want to say that today it was a very, very, exciting, very, very engaging lecture, that is the message. So whenever you are communicating, you definitely have an idea, you definitely have a content which you want to deliver. So that comprises the message. The encode part. Now you have another component which is called encode. What is encode? Transforming information received into a particular form. So when my friend comes rushing to me and says, today I was, terrified and bored in the class. So I understand that maybe the situation in the classroom was such that my friend did not like it. Maybe it was because his best friend didn't come to sit along with him, or maybe the topic was such that he could not understand anything. Maybe the teacher was not very, very in a quite pleasant mood. That must have, irritated him. There can be so many things. So it will be my form of receiving the message, which is encode. You then have channel of communication. What is the channel of communication? Manner in which the message is sent. So what would be the manner? That would be different. Manner would be different. You have different platforms of speech. Interpersonal speech, one-to-one speech. You can have, as I said, you can have a group of friends sitting on the table and then you're talking. That is very informal. You can have a formal communication amongst a group of colleagues. There is a discussion. You have different channels of communication, right? And then you have a receiver. Who would be the receiver? This is easy enough. The person who is the target of communication. So when I'm talking, I intend to deliver my talk towards my listeners, towards my students. So keeping, myself aware of the target. If I am supposed to talk to a toddler, I cannot talk like this. I have to get down to the level of the toddler if I wish that the toddler understands what I am willing to say. If I am talking to an elderly person who is out of this proper professional line of activity, and that person is a retired person long time back, so I cannot talk the manner in which I am talking with you now. So I have to consider that. So the receiver, otherwise what will happen? My communication will be defeated because the receiver would be unable to receive whatever I intend to deliver. Okay? Decode. Processing the received message into understanding. So now once the receiver receives it, in the head of the receiver, in the consciousness of the receiver, the message has to be broken down. Like you digest your food, the message also needs to be digested by the brain. It has to be, able to comprehend what the speaker tried to say, without which the entire communication will fall flat. And then there is feedback, response to the message by the receiver to the sender. Once the receiver understands, is able to comprehend what the speaker had said, the receiver will respond. Has to respond. That is ideally expected of the receiver. If the receiver does not say anything, if the receiver is not agreeing or is agreeing or has to add something more, all of these would be taken in as feedback. Okay, so the components of public speaking can be presented in a particular diagram, and you have the speaker and the audience, you have the channel, you have message, you have feedback. All of these can be diagrammatically presented. Okay. Then let us get into the next part of public speaking, which is types of public speaking. More or less you have the common divisions that can be made of public speaking are exhortation or call to action speech, informative speech, speech for persuasion, impromptu speech, commemorative speech. Then some of the points that you can consider while you make a public speech. Okay, so what do you do? What do you need to consider, or what do you need to keep in mind? You have to pay a lot of attention to body language, because it is a very, very essential component in public speaking, which combines with actual speaking for a wholesome impact. Body language can be either positive or negative. Okay, so what do you understand by positive body language? calm attitude, arms comfortable, upright eye contact, nodding in agreement, smiling at wit, leaning closer, using gestures. Now, all of these pertain to the physical aspect of the speaker. Okay? And when the speaker is trying to connect with the audience, connect with his listeners or her listeners, the speaker has to, reflect most of these components in order to make the speech lively, in order to make the speech effective, in order to finally get into the outcome in the manner in which the speaker actually wanted. Okay? Some of the negative body language traits are rigid bodily expression, folded arms, saying hand to mouth. Okay? Just, when you ask somebody to say something, it often happens that, if you are requesting someone to say something, a single line or a few scattered words and then finishing it off. Fidgeting, restless, okay, yawning in public. Most of the time students do that. So it is not considered a good trait or a positive trait in body language. Okay. Additional things that you need to remember while you are in the in the act of delivering a public speech. One should also take into consideration issues related to gender. Because when you're talking, say you make a sweeping statement like women are very lazy. So that would be very, very insensitive remark to make. Or if you just come and say that, all students are nowadays, they are very, very irresponsible. So that would be very, very, a very unkind thing to say. So you need to be very sensitive, very aware, awake when you're talking of certain things. You need to take into consideration the issues related to gender, interests of the listeners. So the listeners are people with whom you want to connect. If you want to connect, you need to be aware of what kind of communication would really make them open up to you. Then also you need to remember age group. As I had told you, if you're talking to a group of small children going to say class 4 or 5 or 6, you are not supposed to, talk to them about what you are doing in your university. Of course you can do that if you come down to their level. So that kind of sensitivity, that kind of, ability, empathy towards your listeners is very important. And of course, knowledge of the topic. Listeners very often understand when the speaker starts speaking whether the person who is speaking is actually in control of the topic. That knowledge has to be reflected. It will eventually get reflected in your speech. So it is important that we understand while we are engaging in public speaking, we understand that there are certain important issues, important areas which we need to keep in mind if we want to make our act of speaking in the public become effective, if we want to really get into the process of communication in the best possible way. For example, if we talk about, very, very famous public speeches, one very famous speech is that of Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, and it is very important. You must be aware of that. That particular speech is known as "I Have a Dream," and this is a reference to Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech on a particular event in somewhere in the mid 20th century, where he gathered up in front of a huge audience of more than 2.5 lakh of people, and he started to talk about apartheid and racial discrimination in America, and he exhorted the people to take action, to fight against, to stand up unitedly against such sort of discrimination. And his speech can be taken as an example of call for action speech, okay? Because in the speech, Martin Luther, exhorted his listeners to stand up for freedom. As he says, In a sense, for example, there are certain lines, in a sense, we have come to our nation's capital to cash a check, okay, to stand up for freedom together. And then he says, still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. If you look at the use of words made by Luther King, you see, when he says we are still, sadly crippled, manacles of segregation, chains of discrimination, these are all negative adjectives which are giving intense emphasis on emotion. It will arouse the emotion in the listeners. And then there is this invitation to unify. In a sense, we have come to our nation's capital. So it is not me that I am experiencing this crippling effect of discrimination, but all of us together. So what happens in this process is the fact that the listener no longer remains a separate entity, rather he becomes one among the audience. So Martin Luther King's speech still remains one very, very strong, powerful speech of a public speaker, an instance of a very, very strong, influential public speaking. We can learn a lot from the manner in which Martin Luther King had used effectively language, body language, and made the optimal, use of the situation. Okay. Let us now get into the three essential components in public speaking. All of us are aware of Aristotle. Okay. Aristotle had identified three essential components of public speaking. So those are ethos, pathos, and logos. Now let us see what are these. Ethos is about how ethically you are trying to engage the listeners. Okay. Pathos is about your, emotional involvement in the process of speaking. And the logos that Aristotle talks about is about the use of language that you would make when you are trying to talk to your listeners. If we get back to the types of public speaking, we will see that, for example, we had come across Martin Luther King's speech, which can be identified as call to action speech. Now, what would be the other form? The informative speech. Now, informative speech would be, as the name suggests, when you are trying to deliver some sort of information. It can be a radio talk. It can be a TV discussion, television discussion. It can be, a teacher who's taking a class. It can be a certain form of, information that has emerged in the society, in the formal and informal sphere, and you need to inform the public about it. So in those type of speeches, unlike call to action speech where you can be informal, in informative speech, on the other hand, you have to be formal because you are constantly focused upon delivering a certain information. Remember that you need to maintain your decency. So being decent, being proper, being generous, being very, very polite are all aspects of a particular speaker that would make the speaking evolve as a very, very pleasant one. Okay. And then finally we come to commemorative speech, which is again, as the name says, you need to deliver a speech in the memory of somebody. Okay, so there are occasions in universities and colleges and other, elsewhere in social organizations that you organize a particular event in the memory of a particular person. Whatever kind of commemorative speech one is delivering, it is important that the person, that the speaker remembers to recall the life of the person whom that speaker is talking about and contextualize that particular occasion with the life of the person who he or she is trying to remember through the act of the speech. Okay, so public speaking is a very, very important part of your personality, and it has to be, seamlessly connected together. Your personality should be such that the moment you begin to speak, people would love to listen to you. Okay? A speaker's gift is a dangerous weapon which is often misused. Basically, there are 3 methods by which we can achieve something with other people. They can be compelled, they can be persuaded, they can be convinced. As a rule, only the last method is legitimate. So if you look at this observation, you will see that there are certain very, very important details regarding public speech. First of all, rhetoric, your use of language. It can be of service to both good and evil. You can speak in such a manner that you finally arrive at something that is positive. The outcome of the speech is positive. Your rhetoric can be party to evil or truth or lies. Okay? So there would be a good side to your speech or a bad side to your speech, a positive side or a negative side. The second one is the fact that the speaker, when the speaker is speaking, that person can achieve the goals of the speech by either compelling, persuading, or convincing. In the 3 forms or the 3 approaches, definitely you might understand that the speaking type, the approach, the perspective would be very different. In order to compel, in order to persuade, your rhetoric would be very, very different. But the final type is when you're speaking to convince. Convincing somebody is transforming the listener from inside. Persuasion and compulsion can be trying to influence the listener through external, strategies. You try to affect their internal understanding of the particular idea, of the particular issue that you're trying to deliver. And as a result of them being convinced, the whole purpose of communication is fruitfully achieved. So, according to Lemmerman, he says the last method is legitimate. This is the best method that one can use in order to have a good communication. So, we come to the end of the module on public speaking. Thank you.